This lunch keynote conversation will be moderated by our Deputy Director here, Awais Azhar. Let me give you a quick brief introduction of Ms. Candace Valenzuela. Ms. Valenzuela was appointed in April 2022 by the Biden-Harris administration to serve as the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development's Regional Administrator in the Southwest region. As one of 10 regional administrators, Ms. Candace is based in Fort Worth and oversees HUD operations, 8 field offices, and federal housing assistance throughout the 5-state region covering Texas, Louisiana, Arkansas, Oklahoma, and New Mexico. She's a mother, educator, and a former school board trustee. She first ran for local school board to improve Texas schools, becoming the first Latina and first Black woman to serve on the Carrollton Farmers Branch School Board. While on the board, she worked to ensure that the faculty and staff would be able to afford to live in the district they served and that students would have access to a strong education. Ms. Valenzuela was the Democratic nominee for Congress in Texas' 24th District in 2020. Thank you for being here, Ms. Valenzuela. Gail Lyssy has over 35 years of experience in the transportation industry. She joined the Federal Transit Administration Region 6, in 1996 as the regional engineer, was promoted to Director of Program Management and Oversight in 2005, Deputy Regional Administrator in 2014, and Regional Administrator in 2020. She has received numerous awards for her contributions, including the U.S. Department of Transportation Secretary's Award for Excellence, as well as numerous U.S. DOT Secretaries Partnering for Excellence and Team Awards for her efforts in support of emergency response and other multimodal efforts. Prior to joining FTA, Ms. Lyssy was the Director of Transportation for a transportation engineering consulting firm here in Dallas, Texas. Thank you again for being in our panel. Awais Azhar serves as the Deputy Director of HousingWorks Austin and is a Community and Regional Planning PhD candidate at the University of Texas at Austin School of Architecture. Awais has been engaged in several affordable housing, land use, and transit community initiatives in Austin. He currently serves on the City of Austin Planning Commission, Project Connect Community Advisory Committee, and Austin Economic Development Corporation Board. Thank you all again.
Thank you, Sam. And we'll get started here. I do want to start by just thanking both of our regional administrators and for the work that the FDA and HUD are both doing in partnership with our community, our city, our transit agencies. The work that we're doing here locally, we could not do it without all of y'all's help and your assistance. So we're thankful that you're here. I'm really going to start off with a broader question first, then we can dig into more things. And the first one is, how are the Department of Housing and Urban Development and Federal Transit Administration working to ensure that we're really seeing that housing and transit opportunities are used to connect and restore access to our communities? Candace, go right ahead, jump in.
Well, first off, I want to start with, I just learned from Mr. Kumar, happy birthday.
Oh, thank you.
It's an honor to spend it with you.
I appreciate it.
But what the administration has done, I think from the absolute onset, as we've been talking about housing as infrastructure, because for our workforce, for the strength of our economy, effectively housing is infrastructure. And so the Department of Transportation, I know, has been working more closely with HUD during the course of this administration to make sure that we're planning for communities as a whole, right? We're taking a holistic perspective. No one is well served by living very, very far away from where they work, very, very far away from amenities, and particularly when you're talking about communities that are lower income, that are more vulnerable, those prices are astronomically higher to them relatively, and it's just terrible for the economy. So we have been really pushing for better development, more development, right? So HUD started off with a $3 billion higher, just coming right off the post in the FY 2021 budget, but making sure that our communities are also sustainable in every sense of the word.
Thank you very much. And can y'all hear me?
Yes,
you can hear me now. Okay, fantastic. And by the way, thank you so much for inviting us down to participate in the summit. I think this is a great opportunity to make sure that folks do understand the connections between housing and transportation and the importance of that. And with that, one of DOT's goals is climate and equity. And Federal Transit Administration fits right in that role. We're one of 10 operating administrations under the Department of Transportation, and we're here to make sure that public transportation is available and is there for folks that need to get where they need to go. You know, transportation provides 29% of the greenhouse gas emissions across our country. And anything we can do to help reduce that is going to be good for everybody. And also, transportation is the second highest cost for people living in our communities. It's housing and then transportation. So if we can do some things to help reduce those costs, then we're just all better for that. And one of those things is land use, and using land use as a decarbonation strategy, and looking at coordinated transportation planning, zoning reform, and you know, transit-oriented development really can help reduce those number of trips, transfer some trips from roads. And you know, this is Texas. Yes. We are a road-based economy. Everybody goes everywhere in their cars. It doesn't have to be that way. If we can develop communities where the trips can be shorter, and then not necessarily take a car to get where you need to go. Either take the bus, you can walk, you can ride a bike. Make sure that those opportunities are there to help improve our communities, and that's what we're here to do. The bipartisan infrastructure law greatly increased our funding to provide additional funding to local transit agencies to improve their services. Just this year, we had just announced the availability of $20.5 billion to communities across the country to help fund additional buses or replace buses, and especially to try to improve the emissions that are produced by transit to help impact those communities and help reduce emissions that would bring that greenhouse gas emission for mobile sources down. Not only the vehicles themselves being electric buses, especially here in Austin, Cap Metro has dedicated a significant amount of their funding to help reduce emissions in the Austin area by purchasing electric vehicles and supporting that need to improve air quality. But also getting cars off the road, getting people to change their travel patterns, get them out of the car, get them into a bus or a train, and help make our lives just that much easier.
Yeah. I do want to say, you know, we have folks here from the Austin Transit Partnership and Capital Metro, and I do want to give them a big shout out for the work that they're doing in our community, because like you're saying, I think that's a great way of looking at it. The work that we're doing around transit and mobility is part of our climate equity goals. Yes. And environmental equity work that we're trying to do. Sorry, go ahead.
And actually, along those lines, we also have the Green and Resilient Retrofit Program, which is about $4 billion in loans and about almost $1 billion in grants going to HUD-funded properties to update those properties so they have better HVAC, right? So we're saving on heating and cooling and affecting the bottom line for those communities, but also making more resilient, sustainable housing. And on top of that, we have folks that are actually using some of that funding to install more electric vehicle charging stations. I think one of the biggest issues for folks that are living in multifamily housing is that, even if they're interested in the real cost savings of having an electric vehicle or a plug-in hybrid, is that they just will not have access to plug it in. And so we're looking at more HUD-funded properties, even in East Texas, for instance. People would never guess that you would find electric vehicle stations at an apartment building in East Texas. But we're seeing those go up thanks to the funding we got through the Inflation Reduction Act.
I really appreciate that. And, Administrator Lyssy, I feel like I will go to you on this question. We're talking with Austin Transit Partnership. They're looking to apply for the FDA's capital investment grant in support of Project Connect, which of course is a big priority for our community. And for local jurisdictions to remain competitive, it is important that they enact zoning and land use reforms and develop affordable housing along this transit infrastructure. Why, from the FDA's perspective, is it really important to do this work?
Well, our mission is to improve America's communities through public transportation. So that's exactly what we're trying to do. We're using the investments through the Capital Investment Grant Program. This is funding that goes to these major capital fixed guideway projects. They're projects that are over $400 million. You've already got 2 projects underway that are under construction, that are under the program. That's the Pleasant Valley Bus Rapid Transit, as well as the Expo BRT line. And then, of course, Austin Transit Partnership has submitted their request to enter project development for the light rail project. So we're looking forward to working with them in order to make sure that they can meet the evaluation criteria for these projects. And one of those criteria is land use. So along that line, we just today, and I brought my notes because this was just published today in the Federal Register, our proposed capital investment grant policy guidance update is in the process of being updated. We're looking to do a final rule by the end of the year. So today we published our notice to identify the areas that we're trying to improve to make sure that these funds go to the communities that need them and that will really benefit not just providing a light rail line from point A to point B, but making sure that the communities along the way and at the stations are benefiting from those investments. And so some of the areas that we're looking at improving on the justification of the funding is mobility improvements, putting a greater emphasis on transit-dependent trips and revising the ratings threshold for that. And then economic development, increasing the weight given to zoning and affordable housing, streamlining that process. And then land use, adding 2 measures to our land use criteria, including a community risk and then access to essential services. So it's so important to make sure that we're not just putting in a rail line, putting in a station, and then people are building housing around that, just making sure that all of that is accessible to all. There's also a couple of areas where we're looking for your feedback, and one of those is, should we add a walkability criteria to our capital investment grant program? And then the last one is, should FTA increase the weight of zoning as a part of the economic development rating? So these are all things that we're considering as we're looking to make sure that we're providing funding to the projects that are really benefiting the communities that they serve. As I noted, this just was published today, so it's out there. There'll be a webinar in, not next week, but the week after, to explain what all these things are. So if you're interested, this is a great opportunity to listen in on that webinar, and then make sure you go in and provide your comments to the Federal Register and let us know what you think, if these are good options, if this is something, maybe we've gone too far. Maybe there's something else that you would like us to consider as we're looking at updating our SIG policy guidance. So very exciting times. We are always looking to improve the policies and improve the program to make sure that and while I say limited funding, we have more funding than we have ever had, but there's still more projects than there is money available. And we really do want to make sure that we're providing the funding to the projects that are meeting the criteria. And we do rate these projects, and if they don't rate medium or medium high, then we can't provide funding to them. And these are all criteria that go to feed that rating.
And Administrator Lyssy, one more time, can you give us the name of this so that we can look it up in the Federal Register?
All right, it's the Proposed Capital Investment Grant Policy Guidance. So if you go to our website, it's just transit.dot.gov. So transit, that's .dot, Department of Transportation, and then gov, G-O-V. And then it'll be right on the front page, or if it's not and you can't find it, just type in CIG into the search engine and it'll pop right up for you.
And I want to say there's folks in the room, they're going to be very excited to hear about adding walkability scores to these, or looking at adding more land use. I'm like looking at a person, I'm like, yes, and I can see her clapping. So I feel like there's going to be a lot of excitement around things like that and bringing in land use reform. And Austin, of course, you know, our mayor mentioned it this morning. I really want to thank, of course, the mayor for leading and championing on this. But we do have staff from Councilmember, Mayor Pro Tem Leslie Poole's office. They're working on the home initiative. We have folks here who have really been working on other ideas, such as the work on compatibility, which is Councilmember Chita Vela's office. So we have a lot of council offices that are really looking at this zoning and land use reform, and we're taking it very seriously as a community. And I know some of these conversations, it came up earlier. These are difficult conversations. We're sort of working through them. We're trying to get to an impasse of a lot of these things that we worked on in our community. But I think this is the moment where we all feel like this is important, and partially because of what you all are setting us as a standard, right? The federal government is leading the way of telling us where we need to be going. And I just want to acknowledge that because it's a big thing. I do want to come to you, Regional Administrator Valenzuela, and one of the things that's really exciting is it's also a rule that existed previously, but it's the affirmatively furthering fair housing rule. And it's really critical for us to work on that, and there's been a renewed commitment by the federal government and HUD into that. So can you explain a little bit to the audience what the rule is and what are ways in which communities can meaningfully work on affirmatively furthering fair housing?
And so this actually reminds me a lot of affirmatively furthering fair housing and the way, I guess, this current iteration. So affirmatively furthering fair housing is language that's out of the Fair Housing Act. But it wasn't made into an executive order until the Obama administration, and it really kicked into effect late in the administration. Shortly thereafter, the following administration retracted that rule. And we were seeing, I mean, this rule is designed to reduce discrimination in communities, in building, in zoning, and particularly when you're using federal funds to build, ensuring that you are affirmatively furthering the fair housing of the community. Well, as we are bringing it back within the Biden-Harris administration, we weren't just looking at restoring the previous rule, which was good. We wanted to make sure that we were really improving on some of it. And so that means that we're making sure that it had teeth. It had some research requirements. It had areas where smaller entities can kind of group together and gather data at a lesser cost than would have been previously. We're trying to make sure that as we are affirmatively furthering fair housing, we're asking communities to look not just at racism de jure, but de facto racism, right? What was established in the past? Is there de facto segregation in your community? Is the building with HUD funds actually exacerbating that, or are you using this funding, your planning as a remedy? And so we just actually left the questioning phase on this, and I think we should be pushing it forth very soon. But I'm really excited about seeing the long-term systemic change that should come from the shape of this particular executive order.
And I know that there's a link here to looking at sort of exclusionary zoning practices and things like that. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because we're talking about the land use piece and how it fits into the affirmatively furthering fair housing mandate.
I mean, in our mandate, we are definitely also highly incentivizing better zoning, zoning that encourages, as Austin is, more smart density, ensuring that folks have access to affordable housing and access to those resources. And so this, if you are being exclusionary, it may not necessarily help you in the acquisition of HUD funds in specific projects.
I really appreciate that. And Regional Administrator Lyssy, we've been very fortunate here in Austin, big thank you to FTA, that we've received multiple grants for our local community to work on equitable transit-oriented development. It's sort of a conversation that came up in the panel before this, and we've sort of continued to follow on that. And this is the work that we're doing right now is following up and building on that. So we're very excited and fortunate that we've been able to do that work. Why is it that such development is essential for improving access to transit and creating effective infrastructure? From the transit perspective, what does it mean?
Right. And the idea is to make sure that people have a way to get where they need to go.
Yes.
And I think the next generation has an even better handle on this than my generation. When I was growing up, you turned 16, you went and got your driver's license, or 15, and I think today's kids really understand that there's more out there than just a car. And we need to make sure that we're providing the funding so that local transit agencies can provide those services that their communities want and need. And so I think even more than in the past, it's so important to make sure that you're planning for those needs and that you have to make sure that you're developing that community. It used to be a transit agency would put in a rail line or put in a bus rapid transit line, and the local developer would put a wall up between the development and the transit access because they didn't want to be part of that. Well, that's changing, thank goodness. And now the developers are understanding that this is a benefit to build and provide that housing that has access to transit, that is what the people that is going to rent those apartments or buy those condos, that's what they want, is to have that alternative to getting in a car and driving down to downtown Austin and paying $35 to park for the day. Oh my gosh, or whatever it is, and that's probably cheap. Oh my Lord. So, it is a great opportunity that the developers have in order to work with the transit agencies and with the cities to make sure that the residents have those opportunities and that it's not just housing, that they're providing a community that folks can live and work, and transit is one of those opportunities that they have to leverage and use that to improve their community.
And I'll say for their parts, I'm seeing a lot of cities working very closely with their housing authorities. I've talked to several throughout Texas, and as they've redeveloped or revitalized certain areas where they're not trying to displace neighborhoods but try to keep them together and in better circumstances, housing authorities have said, hey, you know what would be really great here? A bus stop. And cities have said, yeah, that's absolutely right. And so I've seen new routes develop as we're seeing more housing for elderly folks, for folks that are effectively running our economy, but not having access to the means to get to their places of work. I'm really excited to see that kind of hand-in-hand partnership between cities and housing authorities on transit.
And Cap Metro has been so successful at receiving funding through FTA. They know to come in and ask for the funding. The programs are there. And the transit-oriented development planning process, and through we have a pilot program for TOD planning. And just this week, we've announced $1.5 million for Capital Metro for the Crestview station. So congratulations, Capital Metro. And by the way, this is their 5th grant under this program. So they've been doing this for a long time, and it's really good to see that we've been able to continue to support that going forward and provide these opportunities for the planning for what the community needs and wants.
And I want to say, not to sound like the shout out brigade cheerleader on there, but I do want to thank our housing authority, because I know they've done an exceptional job at this, Housing Authority of City of Austin, Mike Gerber. They've done an absolutely wonderful job of really working with their existing residents to make sure that even as they're making improvements on their properties and upgrading these properties that are now coming out of 80 years, that we are really ensuring that those residents get to move back in, that they have a right to return, that they're being stabilized in their communities, and we're linking it to transit. One of our properties that we've done is Chalmers Court. If folks have not seen it, you should please go and see it. And it's part of our transit-oriented development in Plaza Saltillo. So it's exciting, and the work that they've done is truly worthy of acknowledgement. I'll go to a slightly different tack here, but in 2023, the Biden White House released the blueprint for a renter's Bill of Rights, and it included a number of recommendations for HUD actions and strategies that can really help support tenants nationwide. What steps is HUD right now taking to ensure that tenants are protected from discrimination and that their rights are recognized?
Well, in addition to, we're pushing for better affirmatively furthering fair housing, we've restored a number of protections, including those for LGBTQ folks. This is also one of those things that fell by the wayside in housing and healthcare that we have been sure to bring back. We're training folks that are working in the housing industry on identifying that discrimination and on reporting it. A lot of folks don't know that if they don't necessarily have to be subject to that discrimination, but they can also report if they have witnessed it firsthand. There's also ways of reporting anonymously for folks that are afraid for their well-being. And so we're trying to both help folks on the ground if they're seeing individual cases, but also working systemically. And I know that tenants' rights has been a little bit controversial for a lot of states that may not necessarily have prioritized. Maybe they're more prioritizing, and we love our wonderful landlords, but not necessarily considering the quality of life of our tenants is not okay. And so this is just really a start. We have a lot more to do and a lot more to road to go. But we're basically putting out there what our direction is for the next few years.
And I know some of this work has been reducing barriers for entry into some of the HUD housing as well.
Right.
And ensuring that more folks have access who historically have been left out. And this is something we've sort of heard throughout the day.
Yes. So we talk a little bit about some of our returning communities. So folks who have left the prison system, and we're making folks aware of their rights and their ability to get public housing. A lot of folks just think that they're completely out of federal programs, but that's not the case. And we're also talking with localities about their zoning, about some of the extra restrictions that may not necessarily improve the safety and quality of life of residents, but keep a lot of folks from coming back and really becoming economic contributors and rejoining their communities. So we're on the ground doing lots of work at our former secretaries and our current acting secretary's direction.
I really appreciate that. And just to let folks in the audience know, we'll be coming to audience questions a little bit. So again, look at your Hoover app, put the questions in. We'll come to that in a second. I do want to go back to something, and I think this came up with the example of Denver we were seeing in the previous panel as well. But the FDA has issued new guidance that allows for properties that is no longer needed for transit purposes to be transferred to not only local governments, but really work with nonprofits and other partners as well, and to see if there can be for any redevelopment that will have significant affordable housing. Can you tell us a little bit about what those opportunities look like, and what is it that the agency is looking from the perspective of how we can utilize some of those ideas?
Sure, and that came about as part of the National Defense Authorization Act in 2021, gave the, not just transit, but others the ability to dispose of property, not just to other government agencies, but to nonprofits and to developers. So as Chessie mentioned earlier about Denver and the park and rides, you know, it becomes a question, does the transit agency keep the property and develop it, as they did here with Saltillo Plaza, which was is a very successful, I think, project that was a coordinated effort between FTA, HUD, and EPA in order to build the Saltillo Plaza development on an old rail yard, and has just, if you go over there, you'd never know it was an old rail yard. But also, you know, there's been a change. COVID really had an impact on transit ridership. There was a huge commuter market. When everybody was coming from the suburbs and taking the bus or train downtown to work, there was a significant amount of ridership every day. I mean, how many people here go to the office 5 days a week? Oh, more than I would have thought. So, you know, what's that, about 10% of the folks here? So those park and rides just are not being utilized as much as they had been anticipated to be used. So transit agencies are considering those opportunities, and one of them now is to sell the property. This is for a federally funded parcel. So if they've locally funded, we don't have anything to do with it. They can do whatever they want with it. But if there's federal dollars involved, what happens is if they just sell the property, then they owe back the federal government the current market value of that property. So especially here in Austin, you know, they might have bought something for $1 million that may now be worth, who knows, you know, $8, $10 million. So Cap Metro would then be required to refund the federal share in that property if they didn't sell it in a way that meets something under this criteria. So what this does is it gives transit agencies the opportunity to sell property as long as it's used for transit-oriented development. So that's kind of the key there, is that they can sell it to somebody other than a city as long as that property is being used for transit-oriented development and has a significant amount of the units that are for low income. So make sure I get my numbers right. So it's 40% of the units are affordable. That is the requirement, up to at least 40%, and then at least 20% of those units need to be for median income of less than 30%. So the 40% is related to a 60% median income, and then of that, 20% needs to be for a 30% or under median income. So we've just provided new guidance for this because while it's been available since 2021, there were some questions that were coming up, especially with respect to developers as this has become more known. And so we wanted to make sure that there was a better understanding of what these requirements were.
And it's exciting to see sort of the opportunities that are now available and how we're looking at, you know, public property. It's come up again and again. How do we utilize and leverage that to expand affordability opportunities for our communities and stabilization? I'll go to an audience question here. And again, folks, feel free to, you know, add in more questions as we go through. Can you give your thoughts on how Austin now has tolls built around the entire city, and those who've been pushed out are literally being inequitably taxed to access work, place, services, hospitals, etc. What's the solution to this? So essentially, you know, as we're looking at sort of tolled highways, and to our central highways, we're not going to be having tolls actually. That's part of the work that TxDOT is doing. But essentially, I guess the question is, how do we sort of have that inability of people to be accessing those services by having those tolls? You know, to me, it's not just the tolls. It's the displacement of folks from the inner city
to the outer edges of the community that don't have access to transit. I mean, transit can only do so much. You can't have the same level of transit in an inner city that you would have in the edges. You just can't afford it. And you can't make it to everybody's house. You know, especially, I mean, I drove on 130 last week, and oh my gosh, the number of apartments and what I think would be affordable housing is going up out there is huge. How do you make sure that you have effective, affordable housing within the area that the folks need to get to community and have the transit services and can get to the and education and the hospital and to other services that they need to get to? Because you move out there, you better get a car, because that's the only way you're going to be able to get in. And it's going to cost a fortune because gas prices are going up, and the time it takes to get from 130 in, and I don't know, has anybody been on I-35 in the past 20 years? It's a parking lot. I mean, really. So, you know, why? Why can we not, why are we displacing your teachers, your firefighters, your police, and your transit workers? Oh my gosh, when a bus driver can't even live close enough to town to be able to get to his job on the bus, something's wrong with that picture.
Yes.
So really you need to be working, and I think that's why the City of Austin recognizes this. And Austin Transit Partnership and Cap Metro all know that this is something that you need to address, and you're working hard to do that through Project Connect, through other elements and ways that you're working to make sure that the developments that are occurring, oh my gosh, I mean, just look outside. The towers are everywhere, building towers. So, you know, we just need to make sure that the community here is supportive of these efforts that y'all are doing. And I applaud you for the efforts that you've taken. It's so much more than what other communities have done, because you needed to. The cost of housing here was just skyrocketing. And you needed to make sure that people could afford to live in your city.
And I wanted to add that the Housing Authority of the City of Austin has been doing a lot of work to keep folks in the neighborhoods that they have established with each other. As you mentioned, Awais, so much community went into Chalmers and Rosewood Courts. For those of you who, many of you, I'm sure most of you read The Color of Law, you probably know that this area is the birthplace of public housing, and very specifically segregated public housing. And you know, some of the effects of that were very, very, very negative, but we also have cohesive communities of color who would like to stay cohesive and would like not to be pushed out further to the fringes. And so seeing that very conscientious development is something that is helping folks, again, to stay closer to those resources, to those jobs. And it's making everyone's lives more affordable. You know, one of the things that, you know, my region, and I'm not gonna get, I hope I could be forgiven for this. If not, I'm gonna have to just take my lump. I have 5 states that are red in my 6-state region. And I think one of the biggest things that I hear about is just not being able to have folks that want to work. And my biggest thing is affordable housing, or affordable labor is affordable housing. They are intertwined. You cannot separate those two. Nobody is going to drive 2 hours to make your latte. And so as folks are you know, struggling for, you know, having employees in their restaurants, you know, for me personally, I'm lucky enough to have, to, you know, be a homeowner. And I say this a lot, but I'm married, I'm a millennial, I'm an elder millennial, I'm married into Gen X. And so that is how I was able to get into home ownership, I think, earlier than a lot of my peers. And what I am seeing, unfortunately, is that, you know, I was I was in a very, very mixed income neighborhood in North Dallas, which is super weird. I can walk to my grocery store. But the income stratification is increasing pretty significantly. You know, I'm within a mile of Section 8 housing, but now a lot of that housing in the middle is starting to disappear. And so a lot of the children that my kids grew up playing with are getting pushed further and further out. And I know what kinds of jobs that their parents do, and they're jobs that I think a lot of us depend on, whether it's in healthcare or in teaching. And so I understand why they're wanting more money, because they need to drive forever to get in. They have to pay for those tolls. They have to pay for gas, and they're subject to whatever price it happens to be at the moment. And so when folks are pushing away affordable housing and saying, oh, it's for those people, and I'm just like, those people are physician's assistants? Those people are first responder. Who are those people to you? And even if we're talking about poor folks, I've come to this space from needing a HUD housing voucher as a child. We need to think more about the dignity of the folks that are effectively our neighbors. They're not coming from elsewhere. They're not coming from California into Austin to live on the streets. People who are coming from California here have money. The majority of the folks that are being displaced here are fellow Texans. And we need to start thinking about them as our neighbors and, at a very basic and maybe greedy level, as people we need to do things.
Oh, I appreciate that very much. Well, I'm going to keep you on your toes. We have another tough one here. But historically, highway construction and urban renewal projects in Austin have torn apart and isolated communities of color. How can current transportation and housing initiatives work to repair this harm and reconnect divided neighborhoods? And I'll ask any of you both to jump in at any time.
I'm seeing some folks reimagining the way in which their highways are being structured, and this is, to lots and lots of controversy. And particularly when I'm, thinking of my North Texas community in Dallas, where is our transit serving us? Where is it no longer serving us? And how should we be structuring around that if we have the opportunity? And so, in some areas, it's just moving our highways. In other areas, it's ensuring that if the opportunity isn't there, not trying to tear these communities apart and insert them there, but making sure that we're prioritizing the building of access to healthcare, access to schools, access to restaurants, access to grocery stores. And in fact, a lot of people don't know that there's HUD funding available through CDBG and the loans that you can get based off of CDBG to build grocery stores. And I've been to a number of communities who've leveraged their funds that way so that folks are no longer in food deserts. So I think first off, we have to start by recognizing that this was something that was happening, right? And then conscientiously remedying that. And I feel as though HUD has been working really hard at that. I know that Secretary Buttigieg, right out the gate, was talking about these communities being divided and displaced. And it was something I really appreciated hearing from him.
And Department of Transportation has a whole Reconnecting Communities program to try to help remedy some of the sins of the past. Your great example right here, I-35. Divided the community, and of course now it's controversial about what they're going to do, but Department of Transportation has provided funding to try to help address some of those issues with the funding for the cap and stitch project that is part of the I-35 program. So, I think we need to make sure that we don't look at the transportation system as roads, transit, freight, railroads. It needs to be a system that all works together, which is why it comes down to the planning of these programs to make sure that we're looking at the transportation system as a system, and that transit is part of that conversation. It's not roads and transit, it's roads and transit,
right,
and rail, and making sure that, and freight, because you've got to deal with freight as well. So you need to make sure that all of that works together. And you know what? In order to make this happen, we really need your partnership to make it all happen. It's not coming from FTA. It's not coming from, I mean, it is your decision how you use your federal funds. And it really is up to you to make sure that you do the right thing.
And
Go ahead.
Thank you, first of all. Thank you.
Yes.
And I know we need to wrap up, but I just want to throw in one more thing here. The other thing is that in recognition of this, we're trying to prevent future segmenting of those communities or have a more conscientious expansion, as we are seeing. For instance, I was just in the city of San Marcos yesterday, and they're being very conscientious about how they plan their future as they've seen issues in Texas arise. And so through HUD and the Department of Transportation, and we're actually partnering with multiple federal agencies. We have the Thriving Communities program. So what HUD is doing is we are providing technical assistance to communities of high need that have received some transportation funds to help them to start planning around what's environmentally sustainable. So FEMA and EPA are involved. What is going to encourage small businesses? So commerce is involved. What is going to give folks access to food and education, and just taking a whole of community approach as these cities are starting to grow at a rapid pace, so that not only do they have the future in mind as they are building and growing, but that they have federal partners at the table, and that technical assistance is supposed to kind of reduce that distance, that gap, increase that bandwidth for some of those smaller localities that don't have a team, an army of grant writers who know the ins and outs of federal funds, but folks that really, really need the money, but don't always know the most efficient way to get to it. And this was primarily because our former secretary, Marcia Fudge, and I'm not shading, excuse my term, current acting secretary, Adrienne Todman, she is a part of the wonderful plan, I think, of Secretary Fudge, but our former secretary was the mayor of a large-ish city, but not a large city, and so she understands the difficulty a lot of these growing areas have in receiving this money, and so she wanted to make sure that she left them in good hands, and I think that the Thriving Communities program with the Department of Transportation is one of them.
I'll be ending here in a second. I do want to just quickly, one tiny thing, because it's a thing of fun, it's a question in the chat, so don't blame me here but how many people in the room have utilized any of our city transit in the past 6 months? It's a question. It's a fair amount of people. This is very exciting. Right, and I think I really want to acknowledge something, Regional Administrator Lyssy, that you were saying, right, that it's a system, how it all works together. And I would say, honestly, housing is a system in the same way as well.
Yes.
We cannot say single-family homes that are for sale and apartments for renters and public housing for low-income people. All of these are systems, and how we integrate it all together is the meaningful part. Well, I just want to thank you both again. Thank you all. And thank you for your continued partnership. We appreciate y'all very much.
Thank you.
One more applause for them.